Thanks for joining me on another episode of You Make It Happen, where we discuss travel, trauma, and everything in between. I'm your host, Missy. Thank you all so much for being here. And if it's worth it to you, please rate the podcast 5 stars on Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening. Today, we're going to be talking about anxiety and travel, DBT skills, what is trauma, how to pack for a longer trip, and what snacks I like to pack for just travel in general. I also have a couple of excellent reading recommendations. As usual, you guys are getting to know me, so make sure to strap in and stay tuned. First off, I just want to thank everybody for the outpouring of responses I've received. I am so grateful for your positive comments, your insightful questions. I do intend to keep doing the show for as long as I possibly can. The more you guys rate and review it, the more I can keep doing this. And I appreciate you every time, even if it's just word of mouth. That's honestly one of the best compliments I can get, is telling your friends about me. So follow, send me your questions, episode topic requests on social at missy.traveler on TikTok, and You Make It Happen podcast on Facebook. So getting right into it, regulating the nervous system with DBT techniques. I'm going to be touching on that today, as well as fear, how it can hold you back from travel. The DBT regulation is also travel related because I can't travel if I'm having a panic attack, or if I'm not regulating myself, or I'm not having a good time traveling, if that's the case. We're also going to talk about what is big T trauma versus little t trauma. You may have heard these terms before, maybe don't know what they mean, or maybe you're an old hand at this and you can explain it to me. So let's talk about fear and how it can hold you back from traveling. So if you have a fear of traveling, or you're afraid of leaving the United States, maybe, because I used to be you. So you're afraid of leaving your home country. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. That's totally normal. Your nervous system can feel overwhelmed by the idea of something new, because something new equates to the unknown, and that's fear. And it can invoke a visceral response in your body that says, no, that is way too scary. Can't fucking do that. Not going to happen. So I'm going to talk about how I made that leap the first time to travel outside of the US by myself. There was a lot of fear for me in the beginning, and the unknown of traveling to places I hadn't been, or just traveling by myself, was fucking scary. Sitting with myself alone was scary. And having nobody to be there for me, nobody to fall back on, nobody to help me navigate, nobody if anything went wrong, it was nerve-wracking. But I did it, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. So for now, I want to go over some basics, because I got a couple questions about this, and I want to be clear and address it. So we all kind of have an idea of what trauma is, and maybe your definition varies a little bit by mine, a little bit by your friends, whatever, and a lot by a therapist. Who knows? That's a terrible joke. So what is big T trauma versus little t? Every child goes through some level of trauma, either big T or little t trauma. I mentioned that in the first episode, and so let's get into that real quick. What is little t trauma? Little t usually refers to things that cause significant distress, but usually don't involve violence or like massive psychological impact, if that makes sense. Psychology Today defines it something to the effect of, little t traumas are events that exceed our capacity to cope and cause a disruption in emotional functioning. So little or small t traumas can be cumulative, as they tend to get ignored by the people that have experienced them, myself included. So a big T trauma is defined by Psychology Today in the same article, which will be linked in the show notes, as an extraordinary and significant event that leaves the individual feeling powerless and possessing little control in their environment. So it's like a feeling of helplessness is often associated with both kinds of trauma, but it's more profound in big T trauma. And if you're wondering if you have experienced childhood big T trauma, use any search engine to find the ACEs test online. Like ACE is ACE, and it stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. It tends to narrow down some of the bigger T traumas that kids more often experience. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't cover everything. And don't take the score as bad or good. It's just what it is. It's not bad or good. How many adverse childhood experiences you had, according to this parochial test, does not define who you are, and it sure as fuck doesn't define who I am. So let's be clear that it's just a tool. All right, so now that we've covered what big T and little t trauma are in general, let's go ahead and move on to anxiety and DBT skills, because Okay, I just have to laugh for a second because right as I was recording that, my dog sneezed in the background and I was going to go back and edit it out. And then I thought, no, that's kind of funny. I'm going to leave the dog sneeze in there because it's real life and I'm recording at home and that's, I have to be here. So anxiety and DBT and how it relates to travel. So what is the narrative that plays when you are feeling anxious? Can you hear anything? Are there thoughts? Is there a repeating wound or statement or anything that you're hearing in your head? Are there childhood core wounds? And if so, what are they? So I get this all the time. I don't know what happened in childhood. That's okay. You don't need to know to heal it. I've also heard I had a storybook childhood. No, no one does. And here's why. Simply not meeting the emotional needs of a child can be and often is traumatic to the child. Now that would be little t trauma, but overt maltreatment is not necessary to cause trauma and or lasting emotional mental damage. So I'll give you an example of somebody that I knew who always said they had a storybook childhood, but they didn't understand why they were attracting people with personality disorders. If you find yourself in abusive relationships or you're attracted to those with insecure attachment styles, baby, I've got news for you. Plenty of that insecurity is in you, and a part of you is in fact emotionally unavailable. And that's why you're attracting emotionally unavailable people. Unfortunately, this means you have to look in the mirror. I want to sing Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror right now. I'm not going to because I can't sing for shit. That's not my talent. It's not my field. But it just makes me think of that. ADHD squirrel. So baby, that means you got wounds to heal. And just like we all do. So this can be good news because maybe you didn't know you were the problem here. You're the one who's attracting these people. Why do I keep dating the same guy? Why do I keep dating the same girl? Why am I attracted to wildly emotionally unavailable people? Because a part of you, if not all of you, I'm sorry to say, is emotionally unavailable. So, I mean, the good news is you can work on yourself. You can't change anybody else, but you can change you. It takes a lot and it takes a lot of work and effort, but you can do it. So I used to be the same thinker, it's everybody else. It's not fucking me. I don't have a problem. You have a problem, bitch. But no, I was the problem. Absolutely was the problem. I was attracting wildly emotionally unavailable men and women. And once I dug deeper into my past, I realized that I didn't need to relive the shit that I had in my core wounds to heal. I just needed to dig and find out what my core wounds were, and it applies to you too. So the actual circumstances and events that led to the wounds do not need to be revisited in order to heal. You don't even need to know what they are, because a lot of childhood abuse or wounds or trauma can happen before you're even verbal, or it can happen before you are able to recall any memories around them. And sometimes we block shit out because the brain does that as a protective mechanism. So again, you do not need to know what it is to heal. So does it sound like too much? It's not me, it's everyone else? Then you're not really interested in looking. And that's okay. It's where you're at. I was you, I get it, I've been there. Maybe you're not ready to do the deeper and harder work of digging into what your core wounds are and how they affect you today, because baby, those are running the show when it comes to your current insecurities, your attachments, your dating life, your married life, your personal life, your friends, your work, whatever. Because if you have an insecure attachment style, I can all but promise you did not have a storybook childhood, and I would argue that it's exceptionally rare, if not impossible, to find anybody with a storybook childhood. And I'm using air quotes here, which you can't really see, but that's okay. Because it's just that. It's a story. It's a fairy tale. It's fictional. It's not real. It's not real life. Whether your parents intended to cause harm is irrelevant. A little quote that I like that applies here is intent without action is meaningless. Sorry, mom and dad, if that was your parental dynamic. So let's talk a little bit about why you're upset and how to identify what you're upset about and how we just can't identify what's upsetting us sometimes. So with anxiety and specifically with ADHD upset or ADD upset, you may not even know you have ADD, by the way. I didn't figure that out for a long ass time. In the help of my therapist. Anyway, sometimes you may not even know why you're upset because that happens to me on a regular basis. Or you know why, but it doesn't matter because you're still unable to regulate your nervous system. So we're going to get into the regulation of our nervous systems in a bit more depth in another episode. But for now, we're just going to talk about the fact that it relates to your nervous system being in a dysregulated state. And when you're not regulated, you're not a well-functioning human being. None of us are. So what are you doing? How are you regulating yourself? How are you soothing or calming yourself? Same question. Do you already know just how to get yourself back to the present moment? Do you know how to practice mindfulness? Great. What do you need me for? Okay, I kid. I mean, maybe that's all you, and that's great, but for the rest of us still struggling, myself included, and still learning, keep listening. All right, we're going to get into some DBT skills now. That's dialectical behavioral therapy. You Google it and you'll find a whole shitload of information. Anyway, I'm going to go over some techniques, how to help with regulating yourself. And for a future episode, send me your questions and comments. What do you want to know as it relates to regulating? Do you already know everything? Then tell me. Tell me what you know. Or are you on the page of what the fuck? This is new. I don't know what you're talking about, Missy. Reach me on social at missy.traveler on TikTok, or You Make It Happen podcast on Facebook, and I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can. I'm getting to them as fast as I can. So I'm going to get getting into the DBT acknowledge, allow, and understand technique I mentioned a couple episodes ago in a future episode. But here I want to share with you all some distress tolerance techniques that have helped me in daily life, in crisis moments, as well as traveling solo. So before we get into these techniques that have helped me a fuck ton, I just want to tell you guys that I want to be very clear. This does not completely calm you, and these thoughts are not going to go away necessarily. You might feel better after grounding or bringing yourself back to the present moment, or even fully regulating yourself, but feeling all better, it's not like anxiety goes away. We just get better at managing it. We get better at regulating ourselves. We get better at bringing ourselves back into the present moment. We get better at emotional regulation and handling our anxiety and calming our triggers and healing ourselves and validating ourselves over practice and with a lot of these skills in place and whatnot. It's not like it ever goes away. We just get better at dealing with it. So, but here we're talking about like undoing who knows how many decades of childhood trauma that's been unresolved, and patterns and impressions you've learned from childhood and you've been repeating in your adult life and in your relationships, not just romantic, but all your relationships over and over and over again. And if you're just now learning how to regulate your nervous system or how to bring yourself back into the moment when you're upset or overwhelmed or anxious, it's not going to cure you. So I just want to be clear about that. This is a tool, not a quick fix, and none of this is quick. It takes a lot of fucking practice. So I wanted to be clear about that. All right, distress tolerance. Let's get back into it. So what can we do to get back into our bodies when we're overwhelmed emotionally, when anxiety is too much, when we're spiraling, sometimes even when we're having an anxiety or panic attack? I'm going to share some techniques that I use, which are mostly the DBT skills, to get back into my body and regulate myself when I get triggered or overwhelmed. So there's an acronym called ACCEPTS, and it's skills for distress tolerance specifically. And they are what bring me back into the moment when I'm so emotionally overwhelmed that I'm just flooded and can't think straight. So I found this shit immensely useful in tolerating pain, misery, discomfort. And as the prolific Dalai Lama has said, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So these skills, the ACCEPTS acronym specifically, have made some of the worst moments in my life endurable, albeit still miserable, like, not gonna lie, because I have learned how to lean into the discomfort and lean on my skills of distress tolerance. So you can look it up online, of course, but I'm gonna go over it for you because who doesn't want to listen to my voice going over this shit versus Googling some shit and having to read? Anyway, the A in ACCEPTS stands for activities. For me, this means like get into something, do something, go do a task, a chore, some work, exercise, something to activate other areas of your brain and redirect your focus. I like to delve into a creative project or painting a room. That's usually more like physically intense, and I find it really takes my focus. And it's something that occupies my hands and thoughts. And so the activities is just something that's at least for a little while. These are all distress tolerance, by the way. That's temporary. Distress tolerance, like a few seconds, a few minutes, a few hours, maybe a few days. I don't know if any of these can be applied for that long. Anyway, moving along to C. The first C is contributions. This is also one of my favorites. I mean, I like all of these, but I like some better than others. So do something for somebody else or a lot of someone else's. Contribute to your community. Help a friend. Give back. It's amazing what a little bit of charity work or volunteerism can do for the spirit. It's done nothing but bring me joy on the occasions that I've donated my time and energy. So the second C is comparisons. Another one of my favorites, and I'm not going to say that about everyone, just to hear me out here. You have definitely survived worse. If you are still here, if you are still alive, you have survived worse. And if this is truly the worst thing that's ever happened to you, look at you. You're surviving it now. And it also can be watching shows about those less fortunate. I used to love watching Shameless because no matter how shit my life had turned, when I was watching that, they were always worse off. And it made me feel more empowered. Like, I can do this because they're making it. They're surviving. Then so can I. And chances are, whatever is distressing you, or you're trying to look for skills to deal with distress tolerance in that moment, it's not the worst thing you've ever been through. You have survived worse. You will survive this. Like, you will be good. So E is for emotions. One of the things I like is emotional music. For me, this helps, but TV is also really super helpful. I was taught as a child by my dad and by my mother, really, that bad emotions were off limits. Sadness was not okay. Shame was way the fuck out there, not acceptable. Feeling, actually, for the most part, when I was a child, was not encouraged. And by that, I mean it was punished. So I learned not to cry. When I did start to cry as a child, I remember my dad said to me on more than one occasion, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. My mother then changed her story, as one with undiagnosed borderline personality disorder does, and said it never happened and that he didn't do that and that what I said wasn't true. But anyway, I digress. So TV helps me cry because now as an adult, I've spent years compartmentalizing, learning how not to cry or feel much of anything. And it wasn't until years into therapy I even had access to sadness as an emotion. And even now, to this day, I struggle deeply to cry. Even when I know I need to, even when I desperately want to get the feelings out, I want to process through the emotions, I still fucking struggle. So empathic connection, usually through emotional movies or television, really helps me. And I can actually get some tears out. So the P is for pushing away. This is where imagery and imagination work has really helped me. Push it the fuck away. Like, lock it up, physically go through the motions of getting out of box, put those thoughts or events or whatever is upsetting you into that box, lock it, put it under your bed in a locked room, put it somewhere that it's not going to bother you, put the key away in a drawer, etc. Just get as detailed as you want. And for me, the more details are better. So sometimes I like to yell if I start thinking about it, like, no, I'll yell no super loud, like to stop myself. If you're alone, obviously it's appropriate to do so. Or you can just think it if you're not alone or if you're somewhere where it's not appropriate to do so. And say it forcefully when it comes up. Remember, this isn't shoving this problem or trauma issue under the rug. Distress tolerance is meant to survive temporarily, just to get you from one moment to the next. Dealing with the shit that comes later is later. So this is to survive this fucking minute. And avoiding it forever would not be healthy. So we're not talking about that. The T is thoughts. This is where the New York Times crossword comes in handy for me, or Seattle Times, whatever crossword you want to use. Focus your thoughts on something else, something consuming, brain teasers, games, math problems, basically anything that takes up your mental focus. Behind in your Spanish lesson, maybe now it's the time to refocus your attention. And if this is one sounds silly, well, then there are like 6 other skills to choose from. S stands for sensations, which brings me to a TIP skill or skills. Hit the pillows, squeeze the shit out of one of those squishy things, those little squish, hand squeezy things. You know what I'm talking about, the stress thingies. I don't know what they're called. Hold an ice cube in your hand or a handful of ice cubes, take a cold shower. So that brings me back to the tip skill, which stands for T is the temperature. Tip, change the temperature. I is intense exercise. And P is paced breathing. So when I'm not as distressed, but I need to bring myself into the present moment for clarity or perspective, or to just get out of my semi or fully dysregulated state, sometimes I'll practice grounding. You've probably heard this term before. It's a buzz term in the mental health community. Grounding is when you bring yourself into the present moment where you're physically located. And it's just one of the ways that you can practice embodiment. So one way to do that is to look around, name 5 things in the room around you. Another way to do that is to feel your feet physically on the ground. Physically touch the ground with your feet. If you can touch the earth with your feet, better. If that's not a possibility, touch your feet to the floor wherever you're at. In nature is best, but even if you can just walk around inside, hopefully without shoes on, touch the actual floor, physically ground yourself. which brings me to another book recommendation that's relevant here. Although it's geared towards women, it's just insanely valuable for anybody. I can't recommend it enough. And it's called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. In the first chapter, the Nagoski sisters discuss the fact that the stress cycle needs to be completed in order for you to move past whatever you're feeling. So the gist of it, what they're saying is incredibly invaluable, which is that you need to physically exert yourself to get the emotion out, whatever you're feeling, especially if it's one that's consuming, overwhelming you, upsetting. Like, we don't need to go for a run necessarily to get our anger out when we're frustrated, but we do need to like hit a pillow or punch something or write a nasty letter that nobody's ever going to read, that you burn or dispose of. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes you're in a business meeting, let's say. You can't jump across the table and tear apart the person who gave you the side eye or rolled their eyes at you or scoffed, or the boss that made you feel shame when you were presenting. But your body takes that the same way as a threat, as if a lion were chasing you or standing in front of you, licking his lips and slowly walking towards you, inching forward a bit at a time with his head down, the intent to hunt and kill you. Your body reacts the same. The fear and the instinctual reaction of your body is neurobiologically hardwired. You're perceiving a threat, and wow, that coworker isn't a lie, and your body still perceived the threat in a very primitive fashion. So you need to complete the stress cycle as soon as that meeting is over. And let's say you stuck your butt in there for 2 hours, and during what seemed like an eternity to sit across from your awful coworker, boss, whoever, who completely disrespected you or shamed you or whatever happened. Then if you can, afterwards, you go for a walk, or do a little run. Do a 30-minute walk, 10-minute run, 10 minutes of weights, 10 minutes of HIIT, high intensity interval training. Punch the couch if you're at home, if no one's looking, or especially if you're alone and working from home. Hell, punch the air until you feel tired. Just physically get it out of your body. This actually leads me to a story. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my time in law enforcement and how that relates to completing, or rather not completing, the stress cycle. So it's kind of the same thing when I worked as a dispatcher, and by kind of, I mean entirely. I was a police, fire, and medical dispatcher and supervisor for more than 14 years prior to this, and dispatchers have a distinct disadvantage to police officers when it comes to exerting the accumulated adrenaline and the stress response to like high-intensity calls. For example, let's say there's an in-progress high-risk felonies. Cops are driving there, they're speeding, or if they're on a scene, maybe they're chasing somebody, maybe they're fighting with someone, they're physically exerting themselves and thereby completing their stress cycle by physically doing something with their bodies. But the dispatcher just has to sit their ass there, listen, worry, build anxiety, build more cortisol, build adrenaline that has nowhere to go, no release, with those chemicals just building up. The dispatcher doesn't have the luxury of completing the stress cycle typically because their ass is in a chair. They're not out there chasing somebody. They're not out there driving fast. They're not releasing that energy in any way. So it's kind of an interesting aside because people look at police officers and firefighters and think, they acknowledge the difficulty of their job and the high suicide rates. And in reality, it's way worse to be a dispatcher. And I'd say most people don't talk about dispatchers because of their stressful jobs until they meet one. They're not on the front lines. You don't see them. All you do is talk to them on the phone when you call 911. Call takers and dispatchers are often the same thing, but that's another story. So they're the first responders, whether they're classified as that or not. They're the first person you talk to, the first person that sends you help, and unfortunately, they're the first person that usually hears when horrible shit is going down. So, sadly, dispatchers have an even higher suicide rate than cops, and higher rates of alcohol and drug abuse, higher rates of obesity, because for a lot of reasons, and I'm not going to get into the depths of psychology here, and I'm not qualified enough, let's face it, but I have taken a few managerial and training courses as a supervisor in dispatch, and in general, dispatchers have a massive predisposition for abuse of all the aforementioned numbing mechanisms, much higher than cops, not to mention higher suicide rates, because they are not completing their stress cycle. That's all to say that they need to get that adrenaline, energy, emotion, anxiety, worry, whatever out. They're not getting any relief, and they don't always do a good job taking care of themselves, knowing that this is the case. And they don't always know that this is the case. Let's be clear. Like, they're not all educated about that because they're not trained about how to take care of their physical bodies or their mental health. And mental health is still, in 2024, we're talking still frowned upon by law enforcement. Just firsthand experience. That's not second or third hand. Anyway, so they're stuck in that chair for another 4 hours because they just got mandatory overtime. So even if they wanted to take a walk or go for a run or lift some shit, do some jumping jacks. It's not always a possibility because their ass is in that chair. And sometimes they just got voluntold or mandatorily told you're staying. Can't be short of 911 dispatchers, can't be short of call takers, can't be short of police dispatchers. Society can collapse. Okay, that's a little dramatic, but shit can go sideways. So there's mandatory overtime in law enforcement, especially for dispatchers, because they're so short staffed because very few people can do that job. Anyway, off on a tangent. So in addition to maybe not being educated about their stress cycle and needing to physically exert themselves in one way, shape, or form in order to get out that adrenaline, they just had a massive spike in their body that will eventually lead to adrenal fatigue at some point. And I've actually known a dispatcher that's had that happen. Actually, I've known more than one. And anyway, it's really an unsung profession, unsung heroes, that these people have way higher rates of psychological instability, illnesses, afflictions, suicide, etc. than cops. But cops are much more visible and well known in the community, and dispatchers just never get seen, really, out of sight, out of mind. Anyway, I went off on a little tangent there, but it's a little bit about my background and a little bit more about the job that I used to do and just how the stress and trauma built in my body in different ways, because I was a dispatcher for 14 years, if you combine that, and supervisor, and it was just a lot. And to be in a thankless job and to be in an unfulfilling job where, yeah, you can be saving lives and you never really see the end of it and you never really get credit for that. And I understand that people don't necessarily need credit, and I felt like, oh, I didn't need credit. But there were times I did. Like, I needed to feel appreciated. I needed to feel that I was valuable, and I needed to feel like I just wasn't a seat filler or a butt in a seat or a number to management. And depending on where I worked and when I was working there, I didn't always feel like that. In fact, I rarely felt like that. So anyway, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but thanks for sticking with me. It's all part of my backstory, and it's how I got to where I'm at today. And it's relevant, and it's part of my trauma that I'm still working on healing. All right, we're going to switch it up for a minute and talk about some fun shit, which means snacks I like to pack for travel. So as you might imagine, it depends on the length of the trip and the flight length. But of course, my typical go-tos for travel snacks are some sort of healthy protein and healthy fats, like nuts or cashews, almonds, combination of nuts, whatever. And sometimes it's peanuts, sometimes it's almonds. It's just whatever I have on hand. I usually like to have some sort of fruit snacks. I like those pure organic layered fruit bars that Costco sells. They're kind of pricey, but they're yummy, and they're small, and they're easy to pack, and so they're easy to travel with. They fit in my backpack in little tiny corners. They're also pretty low calorie for a fruit snack because they're so small, and I love the fact that they are organic, natural fruit bars with not a lot of chemical crap in them. I do try to stay away from processed foods as much as possible, although I enjoy the occasional mac and cheese just like anybody else. But I really enjoy packing a variety of fruit snacks or just those pure bars, whatever I happen to have on hand. I'll usually pack some sort of other sweets, candy, cookies, whatever, because I have a terrible sweet tooth. And so I need something, and it's usually whatever I have on hand. And if I don't have anything, then I'll go to the store, make a little trip, get some cookies for my trip, or gummies. I particularly like gummies. I'm not a big chocolate person. I'm like, I know, sacrilege to a lot of people listening, but what I often like to do is go to a Uwajimaya or like a favorite local restaurant or a favorite local grocery store to get some pre-packed deli food or a pre-packed bento box or meal or whatever, and then pack that with me on the plane. I particularly enjoy taking a sandwich or a salad or sushi or something, whatever that I'm in the mood for the day before I leave or the day that I leave, depending on when the flight is. If it's more than a 6-hour flight, which most of my international flights are, then I usually pack at least one full meal and a bunch of snacks. So it's also nice to have some veggies, and sometimes I'll even take fresh raw veggies since they don't smell and they're easy to pack. And I'll usually take a full meal, especially if I don't plan on eating anything on the plane. And sometimes I'll get lounge access and I'll get lounge food, but they don't always have the best quality food, so I like packing my own meal anyway. And then I'll use the lounge for snacks, Wi-Fi, bathroom, coffee, tea, whatever. I don't like the idea of eating subpar lounge food all the time, especially where I live locally at the SeaTac airport. The Priority Pass lounge here is really not the best, and I've been to a lot of different lounges with it, and the Priority Pass is great, and it gets you into a lot of good quality lounges, but The one in SeaTac is kind of subpar. They need to work on that. They need to put a better lounge in SeaTac. It's not to say they don't have nice lounges overall at SeaTac, because the Delta lounge is nice, and I'm sure the Alaska one is too, but I don't really have access to those with the Priority Pass, so it's not for us poor folk. And I don't always have the Priority Pass. Like, it depends on how much money I have. I've had it in the past. It's nice to have, but it's not always in my budget. If Priority Pass is listening and wants to do a sponsorship, I'm all for that. Just saying, shameless plug. I don't rely on having good lounge food. I rely on the lounge usually for a clean bathroom, Wi-Fi, and some decent snacks and or some, basic drinks. So as a staple and general rule, I always bring an empty water bottle, and I've even started bringing an empty portable coffee cup, usually one that I don't mind disposing of if I need to get rid of it, like a reusable Starbucks cup, the, couple dollar ones, although those have gone up in cost now too. I don't care if it gets lost or damaged, or I won't worry about it as much anyway. So I don't take one of my super nice reusable heated insulated tumblers or mugs, or heat insulated, what I'm trying to say, because they're usually too much weight, and they're just too heavy, and then I have to clean them. And so coming full circle, for me, the snacks look like a healthy protein, a full meal, some saltiness to satisfy salty cravings, some sweet treats to satisfy my sweet tooth, including fruit snacks or fruit strips, and any additional snacks that I have in my house that are appealing for me at the time. Because as a foodie, one of the things I appreciate most is variety. So I'm generally going to pack snacks if they happen to be what I'm in the mood for that day or the day before, depending on when my flight leaves. So as a quick aside, I really love the Daru Market in Kirkland, especially for taking meals on the plane, because their sandwiches and salads and pizza and meatballs and whatnot are really good and easy to pack up. And they got really good at doing takeout during COVID. And their cake, it's a wee bit pricey, but it's super delicious. They even had TSA pull it one time, and they were like, your cake is suspicious. I'm like, yeah, because you want to eat my cake. And they're like, yeah, we may need to confiscate this salted peanut butter chocolate cake of yours. I'm like, yeah, the fuck you will. And they were like, okay, you can have your cake back. And I was like, yeah, damn straight. Highly recommended. Their food's a little pricey, but it's worth it every now and then. So let's get to a travel tip or two. Travel tip number 1, I put my backpack, handbag, personal item on top of the spinner when I'm walking through airports or anywhere with flat, easy rolling surfaces. I cross the shoulder straps of the backpack over the extendable handle, and it holds it pretty well without me having to put a death grip on it and have minimal engagement from me. So you don't realize how much physical exertion it saves you from pulling or pushing a carry-on along a flat hallway, or pushing it gently up a slightly inclined walkway or slightly declined, until you've walked a few miles in an airport, or let's be generous and say 1 mile per airport, even though that adds up real fast when you're hauling all your shit and toiletries and electronics and chargers and snacks, and water weighs a lot, by the way. All this adds up when you're pushing this stuff around. By the time you've been traveling for a while, let's say you've been on a 13-hour flight, you're going from airport to airport, you're tired. The last thing you need to be doing is carrying more weight on your back or pushing more luggage. It's just physically exhausting. Is it good exercise? Absolutely. Do I want the exercise in that moment? Maybe not. And maybe I'm thrilled to be hauling extra luggage and working my muscles more. And maybe if that's you, that's fucking awesome. That's usually not me when I'm traveling, because I usually go through multiple time zones. I'm tired. I choose to work out when I choose to work out. And I choose not to make hauling my luggage any more difficult than it has to be. Call me the lazy trauma-informed traveler if you want. So, travel tip number 2. Let's talk about what to pack. Critical things to pack if you want to maintain a lightweight carry-on and you plan on traveling to multiple countries and or you're taking a longer trip. So one of the things for me that's absolutely crucial is Tide Pods or laundry pods, whatever laundry pods you like. Doing laundry is essential if you want to be able to pack light. I pack about a week's worth of clothes for 2 or 3 weeks of travel, and I always pack a detergent laundry pod. I also like those little fabric scent boost beads. Here's 2 tips for the price of 1. Scent beads aren't fabric softener, but they greatly enhance the fresh smell of your clothes when doing laundry without liquid fabric softener. And I really prefer liquid fabric softener, and I'm not packing that shit because that's not happening. That's too much of a pain. Alternately, you can pack fabric softener sheets, which I usually do take because they don't take up much space and they make your clothes smell nice between destinations. And I usually pack them in with my clothes and then have extra because they also double as bug repellent. If you didn't know that, now you know. The more you know. So if you do go with the beads, double if not triple bag them in sealed plastic bags and put them in your clothing to keep it smelling lovely and fresh, because they will permeate anything that they are around, including whatever snacks you pack. So don't put them next to your food. So travel tip number 3, I pack with vacuum bags. travel size vacuum bags that you lay on to get all the air out, and then use a little zipper across the top to close. You can get them online. They're pretty affordable, and they do end up saving quite a bit of space, at least while you're packing. Sometimes if they are used a lot and they tend to wear out, then they like puff up again after you've packed. But at least while you're packing, if it's been used multiple times and you're not in a place to buy a new one, you can just get your clothes squished in there, squish your suitcase closed, luggage, whatever, and then it's all fitting in there by the time you get to the plane. And, you know, you don't have to, hopefully you don't have to open it up again because it will have repuffed up. You like expanded, repuffed up. I don't know why I said that. Expanded. So I've learned that that's definitely the smartest thing to do. Now, still, you got to make sure you can do laundry. I appreciate you guys for listening. I just want to say I'm so grateful for all of you, all the questions and everything that you guys have sent me. The outpouring of response has been wonderful. I know it's cheesy, but you all make it happen. It's cheesy, but I'm sticking with it. So if you think it's worth it, please rate the podcast 5 stars on Amazon or Apple or Spotify or wherever you're getting your podcast media, because that's how I grow. And word of mouth is just a fantastic, fantastic compliment. So as always, work your shit out, not on other people. And we'll see you next time.